It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce to you our next speaker. Dr. Mark Algren has been an ESL teacher and program administrator since 1979 and has spent 14 years teaching in and directing intensive English programs in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and taught for a year in Hong Kong. He has taught at the Applied English Center at the University of Kansas since 1993 and became director in 2010. He has been active in Teachers of English to Speakers of Other Languages, TESOL International, as a frequent presenter at conferences, author, and member of interest sections, standing committees, and the board of directors, including convention chair for TESOL 2003 Baltimore. Dr. Algren was TESOL president in 2009-2010. With a strong interest in professionalism, standards, and accreditation, he has served on the TESOL Professional Development Committee and on a task force to develop the self-study guide for international review for the Commission on English Language Program Accreditation, and is a program site reviewer for that organization. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Algren.
I have to say, there are a couple of notes I'd like to make before I get down to the business here of things that I've heard this morning, and a couple of comments that I wanted to start with. First of all, I wanted to note that blue jeans are not considered dress attire in the state of Kansas. You may notice when I come out from behind this that I have jeans on this morning, and it is an artifact, however, today of memory and attention span when I was packing my bag yesterday. The slacks are hanging in the closet. I'm very grateful to all of you for bringing Cynthia and me here today. Cynthia and I have been professional colleagues for a number of years, and I was privileged to spend some time at Miami-Dade College last fall and see the work that they're doing, which Cynthia will talk with you about in a little while. It's very impressive to have a number of academic deans and college presidents present in the company of ESL instructors. And I think as I look at the white paper, and in particular the action plan on page 16, that I hope that there are people who are involved in that will very, very strongly and seriously consider, and I encourage you to do so, to submit a proposal for a presentation on this document at TESOL 2014 in Portland, Oregon. Because I think what you have here is something that is so incredibly valuable to other institutions around the country, not just community colleges, but all kinds of ESL programs, that I think it would be a shame to keep it confined to the state of New Jersey. If you'll give me a moment, please, I'll get up and running here. With the title that I've chosen for this presentation, Transforming for Excellence, Meeting the Assessed Needs of ESL Learners. That phrase, meeting the assessed needs, is something that comes out of the CEA standards. And it does not refer only to assessment or testing, but rather figuring out just what it is that students need to have in order to be successful. Today, we have the opportunity to gather together in a small conference, which I'd like to refer to as a crucible of conversation. Because when you get into a crucible, you bring a lot of different ideas together. Where I have some ideas to share with you, Cynthia has some, the academic officers, the presidents have some, the instructors have some. They're all wonderful ideas in their own rights, but as you blend them together and stir them together into this crucible, you may find other ideas coming out the other end, rather like an alloy of metals, that the combination of all of these is going to be much stronger than what any individual item may be. I think what you'll be doing today is laying the groundwork for some significant and substantive change about how you prepare your students not only for their work in your various colleges, but also in their lives. There's a copy of the slides available in your folder if you haven't found that already, if you want to use that for taking notes, and that has in it this session outline. It's already been spoken to, but I want to take a moment to look also again at the importance of who we are and what we do. We'll move on from there to the mission orientation of English as a second or other language. Look at assessing the needs of our students and how they enter, progress through, and exit our programs. Consider some of the alternatives now that are coming into practice across the United States, and we'll have some time for questions and answers as we get to the end of the time that I have with you. I know Cynthia and I have talked quite a bit over the last few weeks about what we're doing here. We look forward also together to the time that we have at lunch and during the breaks, and hope that we'll have a chance to talk with you. And if there are questions that we cannot address during a Q&A session, please feel free to talk to us at other times during the day. One of the young people who grew up in Lawrence, Kansas was Langston Hughes. And one of his quotes that I find particularly inspiring is, "We have tomorrow bright before us like a flame." And this comes from his poem, Youth. And this, I think, speaks to us in our field of ESL, because we are dealing most frequently with traditional aged college students, certainly not always by any means, but young people who have their futures laying out before them. We, as English language instructors, and some of us have been at this a good bit longer than others, as Dr. Lone mentioned at the beginning, I started my career in ESL teaching in Hong Kong in 1979, when the gap between my age and the age of my students wasn't nearly as great as it is now. They're getting younger by the year. But we are providing a foundational tool that is going to allow our students to not only find success in the colleges and the courses that they enroll in, but to have the opportunity to find success throughout their lifetimes. I recently saw in an online commentary about ESL and about immigrants that there were a number of individuals commenting, and of course you have no idea who they are, that immigrants aren't particularly interested in learning English. It's shocking how they isolate themselves into their own communities and speak their own language, and how much Spanish is around us, and why don't they learn to speak English? This is somebody I'd recommend that if you need a way to counter arguments like that, if you ever hear them, is Barry Chiswick. Barry is a professor of economics now at George Washington University. He was previously at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And his research career has been on immigrant populations, and in particular he spent a great deal of time on studying language and economics, the economics of language learning. And it doesn't mean for what we do the economics of institutions and our earnings from our students, but rather what it means to somebody who is an immigrant, whether it's into the United States or another country, the value added when they gain fluency in the local language. And he has proven beyond a doubt, although it's obvious to us, he's got the facts to back it up, that learning the language of your host country is going to give you greater and better economic opportunities than if you remain rooted in your own language and culture. It's really quite a remarkable thing when we realize that the future that we are preparing our students for with the language skills that they need for the classes that they're taking today really are the skills that they are going to be required to have to engage in a lifetime of learning and in a lifetime of change, because they are going to move on to a future of uncertainty, change, and continued learning that they begin here today. When I began my presidential year in TESOL, I was walking through the Denver airport, and this was a sign. I took this particular picture in the Denver airport from the Daniels College of Business. And it was the first time I became aware of really how incredibly rapidly our world is changing, that the jobs and the stability and the futures that we once thought were ours change very, very rapidly. So what students are learning, something that I talked recently with our former Associate Dean of Engineering, who said that by the time our students graduate with a degree in engineering from the University of Kansas, some of the things that they learned in their freshman and sophomore years will then be outdated information, and they will graduate outdated by the time they even get their degree. As we engage our students in their learning, we're preparing a pathway for them from ESL into university courses, and we'll take a little closer look at some of the ways that we do those things. There are traditional ESL programs, bridge courses, pathway programs, concurrent enrollment, which is what the fourth bullet refers to, students getting into upper level intensive English program courses where they may be concurrently enrolled for academic credit in other courses. And the last bullet was something that should have been deleted from the slide because it doesn't fit with everything else, but it's still there. What we're looking to do in our program and what we do in many other programs is to find ways to start engaging students in the community of learners. In our field, we have a number of acronyms, and I'm sure these are going to be familiar to many people in the room. That's one that should be familiar to everybody. And of course, then we also get EFL, and to those of us in the field, they have a slight difference. We get into the area of English for special purposes, which could be for banking or any number of other things. English for academic purposes, cognitive academic language proficiency, TESOL, intensive English programs, content-based instruction, TEFL, the IELTS exam, the TOEFL exam, but how many of you are familiar with this one? This is the one that we need to avoid. This is the one that comes out as English for no particular purpose. Often when students get to our level and they're in our classrooms, we have a pretty clear focus, and that's certainly what the white paper is working at, and I think it's what all of you are working at. But what we do in our programs is certainly far more than linguistic preparation. We are preparing our students for academic life. They need a great deal more than simply language or new words to translate their ideas into another language and think that it's all going to work. I think it was Steve Martin once who said, "Oh, those French, they have a different word for everything." Okay, it's not just giving students vocabulary and words so they can translate. They're going to need information and learning for social readiness and cultural and academic readiness. We provide academic support for retention. The academic support that we're working on providing, we do diagnostic and advising services for our students. We have to help place them in the right levels so that they can learn as much language as quickly as they possibly can. And often that means talking with students, as our counselors do, when the student comes in and says, "But I'm in level 1, I shouldn't be in level 1." And helping students understand why it's in their interest to be where they're placed. We provide other resources. In addition to language courses, we provide tutoring, we provide advising, and we're meeting needs of a wide variety of populations that come to our classes. Generation 1.5, there are immigrant populations. There are students who come here to study from other countries. How many of you are familiar with these three letters? Another acronym indeed, CEA. If I say that, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, there are a few hands that popped up. CEA is the Commission on English Language Program Accreditation. One of the ways that English language programs, especially independent, freestanding, proprietary businesses, can be accredited and therefore have the ability, as granted by the U.S. government, to issue immigration documents, notably an I-20 for the acquisition of a visa to study in the U.S., is by being accredited by a specialized accrediting body. The one that exists in particular for intensive English programs and English language study is CEA. And CEA will say for themselves that we are mission-based accreditation. And that's a very important thing to think about in terms of accreditation. Why is it mission-based? Because I think if you don't know what your mission is, you can walk down any path, and because you don't know where you're going, you'll get there. A mission gives you a direction and a purpose and a focus to what it is that you're doing. The NJCCC has a mission statement. And this is something, obviously, I don't need to read to you, and you can find it prominently displayed on their website. I would ask the question of you in language programs. What is your mission in your college? Who are you serving, and what are you trying to accomplish? Now, I want to point out how we've moved from black and white and gray slides suddenly to color as we arrive at the University of Kansas. One of the things that gets thrown at us when you meet somebody and you say you are from Kansas, they go, "Oh, the Wizard of Oz." And we all know that Dorothy starts in black and white Kansas, flat, featureless, like you see down in southwest around Liberal and Dodge City, and Protection. If you've never heard of Protection, Kansas, it's out there. And then it turns into color when you arrive in Oz. Well, I'd like to think you arrive in the land of color when you come to Lawrence, Kansas. And this is our campus, and I can even see, let's see, my office is just right up there. That's my building right there. And my office, the window is right there. I can see it. I know you can't, but I can. So we developed a mission statement, and as I said earlier, the things that we try to work to develop among our students are all included in our mission statement, which we didn't have before we sought CEA accreditation in 2002. And this is the main part right down here. We are committed to preparing our students. Three key things: linguistically, academically, and culturally. What is their purpose? For university life. And then these are the other things that we also do. But that is the heart of who we are and what we do. We emphasize that in all of our literature, and every student who comes to us for language training knows what they are going to get. If they have other purposes in mind, we're happy to welcome them into our classes, but they know that this is the product that they're going to receive. One of the first things that we do is, of course, we assess our students. And this is one of the things on page 16 in the white paper that you're looking at are your assessment practices and how people are moving through programs. We have proficiency-based language assessment. I'm happy to talk with anybody in a little more detail about how we do that. I'm going to just hold that thought, and I'm going to step over here for a minute and make a comment. As a CEA site reviewer, I remember going to the first site review that I did. And this was a program that had their mission statement and said that they were dedicated to communicative competence for their students. And when we looked at their assessment practices, everything they did was multiple choice questions. There was no communicatively based assessment in that program, and we pointed that out to them. They eventually did receive accreditation, but it changed dramatically how they were going about assessment in their program. In our assessment, other than the reading comprehension exam, which is multiple choice because we decided that's the best way to assess that, everything else is production based. It's writing essays, it's writing sentences, it's doing grammar paraphrase, listening to lectures, taking notes, writing answers as they listen. We don't have multiple choice because that's not what our mission is, and that's not what our students' goals are. So we'll go back just a moment. Our students progress. We'll get into just a bit more detail as we go on. Our students work on a proficiency-based progression through our program. It's not simply completion of a course, because how many of you have ever heard a student say to you in a course at some point, sometime, or have you ever said it to one of your instructors, "Is this on the test?" And you remember it for the test. But in our case, we're not building towards a test. We're building towards a lifetime of language proficiency and competencies that must be retained, and our students have to continue to build on it. So we look at proficiency. What is your proficiency at the end of the semester? Our students, I know, sometimes get a little bit frustrated when they get an A or a B in a class, and then they think, well, I should have skipped a level or gone up 3 levels, or I should be out of here. I don't need that anymore. And they end up repeating a level because they still don't have the proficiency. They can't produce the language. I know it, I see it, I recognize it, I've done this before, but you can't produce it. And it can be a very frustrating thing, and we spend a lot of time counseling our students on this. Throughout our program, students have the ability to skip levels. I know Cynthia is going to talk about accelerated learning and some of the things they do at Miami-Dade College. One of the things we do to try to motivate our students to get out and engage in the language is to show them they have the ability to skip a level. If you demonstrate greater proficiency than what you've learned in class, remember that classroom is the beginning point for learning, not the end point. You go out and use the language, develop your vocabulary, develop other things. You may skip level 3. You can skip level 4. You could skip from 3 out. And we have students who do that fairly regularly. It's a great motivator for accelerating their own learning, and they do it themselves. Other things you're familiar with, and once we get into higher levels, and we'll come back to this in a moment, students may be concurrently placed in academic courses as well as in language courses. A little easier for me, I keep forgetting this is down here, I don't have to turn and look up here. An option for accelerating progress through your programs, again, as I mentioned, that Cynthia will touch on, options to consider in your own programs. Should students be able to skip a level? Because there are many programs in the United States and around the world where if a student gets a grade of C or higher, they promote automatically to the next level. And sometimes if they're not developing the proficiency, of course, students will get to a point where they just flatline and can't proceed any further. Is it in a student's best interest to allow them to get to that point where there are so many gaps in the foundation that precedes it, or should they be stopped at some earlier point and pushed into mastering that type of work? Do you consider students for their ability to have split level not in addition to split level placements, placement in academic courses as well as in ESL courses, and then thinking what the ramifications can be for students when they do that? One of the things that we do in our program is when we have students who are eligible to be in an academic course is we work with them on choosing their courses very carefully. Obviously, putting a student into Psychology 101 who's still in level 3 reading and writing is not a wise move because of the reading and writing demands of that type of course. Getting them instead into a math or a science-based course is going to be much more productive for them and get them engaged in the community of scholars. Again, as I've mentioned already, we have a proficiency-based model, and students are moving through the program based on their assessed need. Once they've demonstrated proficiency, we know where they need to go. As I mentioned before, our exam is entirely production-based with the exception of reading comprehension. We figured out what our cut scores are for where students are going to be in levels, and students demonstrate that proficiency. At a level of 80% on our exam, they're out of the program in that area. We test in 3 areas. In listening, we do not test speaking, and there's a long explanation for that you don't need right now. Reading and writing, and grammar for communication. At our highest levels, We've also decided that because of the rigor of the work that we require from our students in our top level, if they earn a grade of A or A- in that course, then they are exempt from further proficiency testing and they're out of that area in our program. One of the things that we found over and over again, trying to look at the data that supports any of these decisions, is that over the years, the students who all got Bs in 5th level courses took our proficiency test at the end of the semester, and every single one of them for a number of years has passed that area of the proficiency exam when they've taken it. So that gives us great confidence in grades of A or A- being finished. Once a student is out of an area, then they're eligible for concurrent enrollment in an academic course. The enrollment in that academic course often brings students back to their language studies, but not always, brings them back with a renewed vigor to mastering the language because they see how demanding their courses are going to be. The flip side of that, and this is where the advising becomes very important, is that there are also students who, once they are into an academic credit course because it counts on their transcript, it's part of their GPA, then they put all of their time in there and neglect their language studies, which further elongates the amount of time they're spending in ESL courses. So it's something to work closely with students on. One other thing that you might think of considering, especially for newly arrived students, when they take our proficiency test, we have some students who are very, very close to a passing mark, and we think we don't want to hold students back. We're here to support them. And a new student coming in, somebody who's just arrived, especially if they're testing at this level, has a great deal of latent language ability. And over the course of a semester of being in an all-English environment, they activate a great deal more language that has just been lying in the background, and they come back and take our test at the end of the semester and they pass it with flying colors. So one of the things that we will do is postpone a course. That does not mean that the course is waived or it's disappeared for them. It just means they don't have to take it this semester. And for us, that means students who are within 10 points of passing that, so that would be 5 points on a 100-point scale. We'll postpone it, and almost always they'll come back, test, and be gone. So it saves them the time and the money, it gets them into an academic course, and it helps them realize from us that we're there to support them and help them move through as quickly as possible to academic work. We provide a number of other support services for our students. I'm sure many of you are doing these things. We have conversation groups that meet on a regular basis, and those are led by trained undergraduate students who were paid to do these things for us. And it helps our students get engaged in the academic community. It gets them an American friend. How often have you heard your students say, I don't know how to talk to Americans. I don't know what to talk about. Well, we do things like introduce them to the rules and regulations of football and baseball and other things that people start conversations with. A computer lab that's dedicated to our students where they can do more work. This last semester, our Dean of Libraries has supported us by providing space for what I'll call, for shorthand, a tutorial room where our students can go for help with their work from our instructors in our program. Our counseling office that covers academic support, it provides personal support, cross-cultural information as an office, and then of course we have co-curricular and cultural activities to engage students in the community. We're also becoming more engaged with community outreach in our program and getting students involved in things like Habitat for Humanity, which again engages them in the community and puts them in a language learning environment. So we're a little unusual in the way we've structured our program. I'm sure many of you are more familiar with the traditionally based programs where students may be meeting in an intensive program of 4 courses, listening, reading, writing, and grammar every day of the week, so they're in class for 20 hours a week. For accreditation purposes and for issuing documentation for intensive English programs, the Secretary of Education requires a minimum of 18 hours in class, and that's what our program is like. Instructors are teaching 15 to 20 hours a week. Some go up to 25 hours with other support programs. And then exit criteria. We have an agreement with our university, or the university has agreed with us, that they will take completion of our program as demonstrating language proficiency. And that's an important element for other programs within the university where they have their own departmental accreditations, for example, ABET in engineering, where they have to demonstrate proficiency to their own accreditors. So all of this works together, and our students exit based on our say-so. In other programs around the United States, there are some where you have to begin taking university courses, have a TOEFL score, and it doesn't matter what you've done in the intensive English program or what you've left with. There are some emerging models, and these are garnering a great deal of attention. These have come to our attention because there's a, I've left my notes, I'll look up here to keep track of where I am now. These are beginning to emerge because there is corporate interest in ESL. In case you didn't know it, we're big business. As Dr. Lau mentioned a little earlier in the presentation, the number of people who are learning language. And the United States is seeing a number of corporations coming in and taking over ESL programs with a number of promises to institutions about what they are going to provide in the terms of international students and language training. I don't think that that's necessarily a good model for most institutions and probably not for community colleges. But what we're seeing is, as a result of that, some new models coming out. Pathways and bridge programs are strengthening the bonds between students, the institution, and the community, and that leads to retention and therefore to degree completion. Several of these were mentioned in the white paper. A couple that I'd like to add to it are programs that are underway at Drexel University and George Mason University. At Drexel University, they have two programs. Their International Gateway, which is or the UPrep, which is a summer program, where they take students who have a great deal of ability, put them through a program that is very rapidly paced and prepares them for university life, and they do assessments at the end of that program to see if students are ready to begin university study or if they need to spend more time in language study. And that's their International Gateway program. Looks very similar to what George Mason does in their Access program, where students are concurrently enrolled in credit-bearing academic courses that are taught by their institutional faculty. And at the end of these programs, those students are then going full-time into their respective institutions at the sophomore level. The courses that are taught are sheltered, meaning that they're for ESL students only. They're taught by content faculty. They're supported by ESL faculty. The content faculty receive training in working with international students and the nature of the language that they have in front of them with those students. In Drexel, they're working in math, science, and communication and can receive up to 17 hours of, that should be UG, undergraduate credit. And at George Mason, it can be up to 27 hours of undergraduate credit in that program. And then they enter George Mason as a sophomore. A presentation at TESOL this year that involved all of these people. These are all institutions that have similar programs as bridge-type programs or pathways programs. Carter Winkle, who was the moderator, got started on this because he wrote his dissertation on the faculty experience of programs that were being overtaken by corporate entities that were then running the ESL program and assisting the recruitment and retention of international students on college campuses. A couple of those that he looked at, although I think in his dissertation they're not identified by name, are Oregon State University and the University of Central Florida. The others are all programs that, again, similarly have these sorts of programs and I think would be worthy of taking a look because obviously there are a few that are your neighbors. So the academic support models, There are others, and this is where we are at KU, but we're looking at alternatives now, where once a student enrolls in a university course, there's no particular support that's provided for that course enrollment. They're simply into the course along with everybody else. There are other programs, for example, Southern Illinois University, where the English, like the freshman comp series, is taught in the Department of Linguistics by people who are working in linguistics or in the MA TESOL program, and it's sheltered and available only to ESL program students, but they have the same course goals and objectives as the native speaker students who are enrolled in the other series for them. There are a variety of success metrics that we could look at, and this is something I had in a phone conversation before coming out here. It's sort of like a corporate secret, I think, among a lot of universities, that there's not, I looked and there's just not information out there with programs saying, this is our success rate, this is how many, this is the number of students who are leaving our program and moving on to our enrolled programs or matriculating into their institutions. But there are some other things, some indirect indicators that are telling us that ESL programs are finding a great deal of success. The programs continue to grow and diversify. The Chinese student population has grown enormously. 10 years ago, we had maybe 5 Chinese undergraduate students at the University of Kansas. Today, there are slightly more than 900. And we don't know how they found us, but they did. Okay? We made one trip to China, and that's all we've done on a recruiting basis. But the word starts to spread. As I mentioned before, with corporate interests in pre-university intensive English programs, and you could read just as easily their community colleges. I like the saying, money goes where money is. There's a great deal of money in ESL programs, and the corporations who are moving into this are making a lot of money off of college campuses to do that. The matriculation rates are widely divergent, and keeping track of the data to figure out what does it mean to say that students are matriculating. They're coming to programs. A lot of students come because of culture shock and other issues. They don't have a good experience at their first campus. They go to a second campus and they enjoy great success. The first campus contributed greatly to that. I think we need to look at some larger numbers like what's happening nationwide. How many of those students are coming into ESL programs in the United States and remain in the United States and complete a degree program? There are pressures on students to begin academic work as soon as possible. At our level, we're finding that pressure is coming, of course, from families, and it's coming from sponsoring agencies like the Saudi Arabian Cultural Mission that give a restricted amount of time, regardless of the level that students enter at or they're expected to achieve, to complete language study and be matriculated into academic study. So you're seeing the same thing with the ability of your students to have financial aid and the concerns for people who are teaching the content courses that students don't have enough financial aid left to complete their degree programs. So there are a lot of places where there are issues and problems of students getting through ESL programs. The numbers that Drexel University gave in their pilot year, in their first program, they enrolled 6 students just as a pilot to see how it would go. In their next years, let's see, the first year, then they went to 41, 95, and now 75. So it's grown a great deal, and those students are moving on to study at Drexel. George Mason has seen growth from 22 to 56 to 91 students enrolled in their program. A closing reference I would give you as you look at what is it that students need? Going back to the title of the presentation, Assessed Student Need. It's important to get into the classrooms and see what language it is that the students need to have. One thing that you might want to refer back to is this, it's called a monograph from the Educational Testing Service in Princeton, where they work to see what language are students really using in the classroom. And this is the results of what they found. Several years ago, I did a study on this where we surveyed faculty and students on a number of issues across several campuses and ESL programs and found great divergence in what ETS found. Faculty think students need to have to be successful in their programs, and ETS looked at both graduate and undergraduate studies, and we surveyed both graduate and undergraduate international students, and in one case found among the top 10 linguistic things that faculty felt students needed to be really strong at, none of the respondent groups felt were in the top 10. So there's a disconnect in sometimes what students think are important. And sometimes it takes a little bit of thinking. For example, among the Saudi students as undergraduates and the graduate students all felt that the #1 language skill that they needed to be successful as a graduate or an undergraduate was the ability to understand instructions. Where did faculty place that item out of a list of 38? It was down in the 30s. Now, why did faculty put it there? It's not because they don't think it's important. It's because I think faculty believe that's a given. You wouldn't be here if you couldn't do that. Okay? So sometimes it's interpreting the results that you get. And finally, I'd like to leave you with this. What influences how students achieve? And I think it's just a good reality check on how much influence do we have as teachers over the learning that takes place with our students? This comes from, go back. This reference, and it's in the bibliography, which Cynthia will have on the site that she gives you a reference to, the full reference, but it shows for the learning, students are fully half responsible for the learning that is going on and their own achievement. We have an influence of about 30% and then 5% each scattered among these other groups. So that's where we are. I hope there are some new things for you to think about there in terms of the white paper that you've had, the goals, the things that you're looking for. And I know that we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left here for Q&A. I know that I'm standing between you and the restroom and food. And that's not a wonderful place to be. But we'll take 5 or 6 minutes, and then I'll obviously be happy to talk with people afterwards as well. So we've got one question up here.
International students, like from Saudi Arabia and China, who are going to undergraduate or graduate programs at a 4-year school, are a very different population from what ESL students are at community colleges. For example, they have more privilege, they tend to be more homogenized in terms of their first language, and also they tend to be highly motivated because they are on F1 visas, and they're also full-time. We have a lot of students who can't afford to go full-time because they work 3 jobs. We have a lot of students who haven't completed high school. We have a lot of Gen 1.5 students. Of the suggestions you make, how do you envision them being applied to programs like ours that have a very different student population?
I will say, in all honesty, you know your population far better than I do. And I think what I wanted to try to do here was introduce some ideas and some concepts. To go back to the second slide, this crucible of conversation, taking the ideas that we've got here today and start letting them mix together and see what new things will come out. It's not, I don't think you can take a lot of the things, because you're exactly right. The population is quite different, and the pressures that are on them are quite different. But take some of these ideas and say, what might that trigger? Is there some other way that we could look at it, get out of the boxes that we're in, because we're all in them? I know in talking with Cynthia and working with Miami-Dade College last fall, that I learned some things now that we never thought of because we don't think that way. They think a little differently than we do, and the same way that you will, I think, are more aligned. And we took some of those ideas back, tweaked them a little bit, turned them in a little different direction, say that really could apply to us in what we're doing. So I don't have a clear-cut answer for you, but I will go back and take a look at what we've got here, and in further conversation, see if I can see some ways that I might be able to answer that a little better.
So I was referring back to the assessment options. Currently, we offer the AccuPlacer exam for both the native speakers and ESL students. And we do have the center structure, which is multiple choice as well. Are there other programs out there that we can use to improve on the paraphrasing or the sentence creation instead of just the multiple choice for the writing?
There are a lot of programs that use AccuPlacer and similar exams for placement purposes. And I want to make a distinction between a placement exam and a promotion exam or an exit exam, and what you're doing to measure student achievement as they're progressing through the program. I was in a program in the United Arab Emirates that used a modified closed test, 5 paragraphs, and that was used as our placement test, but only for placement. It was not used for progression through the program or to exit the program. And this is something that CEA comments on in the standards. And there were, I made a handout that Lou, is this in the?
It was in the pre-conference readings that went out.
Okay, it was in the pre-conference readings about the, I took out some selected standards for you to think about from CEA. You can see the entire set online, and that is listed on there, and it's in the bibliography, where they talk about the difference between a placement test, that you have something that is consistently and accurately placing students into your program at the right place. I want to look at something that gets us away from our exam for placement purposes only. Because when we grade our exam, if we condense it all together, because it's all graded by hand, we probably spend about 40 minutes per student grading exams. And we test in the fall approximately 700 students. So you can imagine how much time this takes. It's very inefficient. For progress through the program and exiting the program, it's perfect. For placement, it's not. But to come back to answer your question, I have to take a look at that a little more closely. There used to be a book out there about published examinations available for language testing, and it hasn't been updated in over a decade, unfortunately. But I think especially for writing, just having students writing an assignment and developing your own rubric, then piloting that and seeing where it places students in levels so that you know you're assessing it, then you can have training for graders. But maybe for writing you want to do that, and there are a lot of programs that do that. They'll use other exams, standardized exams, for everything except writing. And then they have an essay for that, and they score that.
You mentioned something about library-based student support center. Could
Yes.
you just explain how it works?
Yes. The only thing that our library has done is they have given us real estate. Now, we chose that real estate very carefully. On our core campus, space is very, very hard to come by. And what we knew we wanted to do was we needed a space because faculty are not available 24/7 to their students. So I have an office hour, my student has a question, but it's not during my office hour, okay? And we wanted to have a space where students could go for assistance. We have a writing center on campus that's open to everybody, but they're not there to deal with the reading and grammar questions and the type of writing issues our students have. We didn't have any place to do that. Our Dean of Libraries, fortunately, is very supportive of international students, and she said, I can give you, it's a glass-walled room in one of our libraries, and it's actually they call it something like the Student Learning Center. It's where our writing center is located. Students make appointments to go in there for help with their writing, whether it's freshman writing or a senior thesis. And we have this space 20 hours a week. It's staffed by our own staff, and we're there to help students if they have questions with their homework, or students who self-identify. I know I never get the main idea. I just can't do that. And so we have resources there also, and we can pull that out depending on their level and ability and say, well, let's take a look at that. You know, and they just need more work, and sometimes it's that one-on-one, not a classroom setting, where we can identify their particular thing and the light comes on and then they're ready to move on. So that's what we're doing, and it's been very successful so far, and usage is growing. Last question.
Do you have an online writing lab as part of your writing center?
We do not in our program, and I do not believe that the university has either. Okay? Well, with that, our time is up. We need to stop. It's time to have a break. Thank you all very much.